Kaelen stood in the center of the human command hub, his pulse rifle leveled at the throat of an Astrari general. The air tasted of ozone and ozone-thick tension, a single twitch away from a massacre. Suddenly, the woman he had been sent to extract stepped between the barrels, her voice cutting through the roar of the alarms as she commanded the room into absolute silence. Will a single act of mercy be enough to stop a war that has burned for generations, or has the cycle of violence already spun beyond repair? Stick with us as we uncover the cost of peace. Now, let's look back at how this standoff began. 2 weeks earlier, the only thing Kaelen had to worry about was the grit of red sand in his rations. He was hunkered down in the skeletal remains of a border world hab block, watching the sky bleed purple as the Astrari orbital bombardment finally drifted toward the horizon. It was supposed to be a simple scouting run, a quiet look at the ruins of Sector 6, until the encrypted burst came through his HUD. High-stakes extraction, target, an Astrari asset hidden in the wreckage of the Royal Spire. The spire was a jagged tooth of glass and silver, half buried under tons of concrete. Kaelen moved through the dust like a ghost, his boots crunching on fragments of what used to be a civilization. He found her in a sub-basement, shielded by a flickering stasis field that smelled of burnt sugar. She wasn't a soldier. She was draped in the tattered, iridescent silks of the Astrari High Court, her eyes wide and luminous in the gloom. This was Ilara, a royal of the enemy species, the very bloodline his commanders had sworn to extinguish. His orders were clear: secure the asset for interrogation. But as he watched her reach out, her hand trembling so violently it looked like a hummingbird's wing, the killer armor he wore felt suddenly heavy. It felt wrong. Instead of the cold steel of magnetic cuffs, Kaelen lowered his rifle and reached out his own gloved hand. He didn't speak their tongue, but the gesture was universal. He wasn't taking a prisoner, he was offering a way out. They moved through the ruins for 3 days, dodging patrols from both sides. Kaelen shared his oxygen scrubbers when the dust became too thick, and Ilara showed him how to find water in the translucent roots of the native flora. We often think of war as a clash of grand ideologies, but isn't it actually just a collection of individual choices made in the dark? By the time the Astrari recovery squad cornered them in a canyon of rusted steel, the dynamic had shifted. Kaelen stepped in front of her, ready to die for a woman he'd known for 72 hours. But Ilara didn't cower. She stepped forward, her regal bearing returning like a suit of armor. She spoke a single, resonant command that made the elite warriors drop to their knees in a clatter of ceramic plating. Safe passage wasn't requested, it was decreed. They reached Ethelgard, the shimmering capital of the Astrari, under a flag of truce that felt as thin as paper. Kaelen watched from the shadows of the royal hall as Ilara was swept into the arms of matriarch Valerius. The reunion was a tidal wave of relief and whispered prayers, a sight that made the death world propaganda he'd been fed since basic training crumble into ash. Kaelen watched the reunion from the perimeter, his fingers still resting near the trigger guard of a rifle that now felt like a relic of a dead era. The matriarch's eyes met his over Ilara's shoulder. There was no hatred in that gaze, only a weary, profound recognition of the man who had broken his own world's laws to preserve hers. But peace is a fragile thing, often shattered by those who find more profit in the wreckage of war than the building of monuments. High Exarch Vorak did not want a treaty. He wanted a martyr. As the sole primacy delegation arrived for the final negotiations at the human command hub, the Exarch struck. He didn't use an army. He used a shadow. Internal sensors screamed as a localized jamming array killed the hub's communications, plunging the base into a deafening, artificial silence. Kaelen saw the shimmer of active camouflage in the rafters. Vorak's loyalists were moving like smoke through the ventilation, aiming for Director Thorne and the matriarch. Their goal was simple: execute the leaders, reclaim Ilara as a liberated pawn, and restart the engines of industry that fed on planetary conquest. Kaelen didn't wait for orders. He grabbed Ilara by the arm, pulling her into a service conduit, just as the first pulse grenades detonated in the corridor. "We have to get to the central array," he grunted, his voice rasping through the internal comms of his helmet. Alara nodded, her face pale but her eyes burning with a cold, royal fury. She wasn't just an asset anymore. She was the architect of this bridge, and she refused to watch it burn. Defied their different origins. Kaelen provided the brute force, kicking through reinforced bulkheads, while Alara used her biometric overrides to bypass the locks that should have kept him out. The central chamber was a cathedral of humming data cores and spinning holographic rings. Vorak stood at the console, his hand hovering over the command to vent the atmosphere in the delegation quarters. He turned, his four eyes narrowing as he saw the human soldier and the princess standing side by side, covered in the soot and oil of the underdecks. Kaelen leveled his rifle. Alara stepped forward. The standoff lasted a heartbeat. Vorak lunged, a blade of pure energy whistling through the air, but Alara was faster. She didn't use a weapon of steel. She used the terminal itself, triggering a localized gravity surge that pinned the Exarch to the floor. Kaelen moved in, his rifle butt connecting with the Exarch's temple in a sickening thud. The jamming died. The lights flickered back to a steady, calm blue. Outside, the first of the Loyalist reinforcements were being disarmed by a joint task force of human Marines and Astrari guards. The coup had failed not because of a grand strategy, but because two people refused to play the roles assigned to them by history. Months later, the Zenith Treaty was signed not in a bunker, but on the glass-domed deck of a new orbital station. Below them, the Earth turned in shades of sapphire and white, a sight Alara had only ever seen in the targeting reticles of her father's warships. Kaelen stood on the observation balcony, his dress uniform feeling stiff and unnatural. He looked at his hand, the same hand that had once reached out to a terrified girl in a basement. It was trembling again, but this time it wasn't from fear. Alara stepped beside him and took that hand in hers. Her skin was warm, a sharp contrast to the cold vacuum of the space just beyond the glass. They stood there as the first pyrotechnics of the celebration ignited in the atmosphere, blooming like artificial stars. The bridge between worlds was finally complete. The Zenith Treaty proved that while systems and states create the machinery of war, it is the quiet, individual choice of the observer that truly decides when the gears stop turning. Is the capacity for mercy something we are born with, or is it a muscle we have to choose to flex when the world demands we stay cold? We'll explore that in our next archive entry. Join us tomorrow for the next chapter in The Great Descent.